Hello everyone and welcome to Gurukul Online Learning Network. Today we are covering the topic Introduction to English Debating and we are going further in depth into what rebuttals are. My name is Aian Adib and without further ado, let's get started. Now, as mentioned before, we have tackled the topic of argument, but as mentioned in the argumentation, even if arguments are the most important part of your debate, remember, rebuttals are just as important as arguments because debate is all about arguments and their rebuttals. So sometimes in new debates, a lot of people forget to rebut the arguments that have been presented in front of them. So sometimes the debate can be such that it has been all about both sides presenting their arguments just and no rebuttals as a whole. This leads to a very bad debate in which the judge has to take the debate into their own mind and their criteria and think of the debate from their own perspective. Now, as mentioned before, the adjudicator must judge the debate on what has been given to them in the debate and take all the criteria and notions given in the debate and then judge the debate. So if you do not come in and provide any rebuttals to the argument that has been presented, that means it is all up to the judge to take his own private view on the debate, personal view on the debate, and then give the results. So make sure you're rebutting all the arguments or the core idea of the arguments that have been provided in your rebuttals. Another thing to remember, don't make your speech all about rebuttals. Now, this is also something seen in new debates. The teams are providing rebuttals to every single argument that has been given and forget to give their own arguments. And this leads to the debate being messy again. This leads to the debate having small arguments and massive rebuttals. This again leads to the adjudicator having to take their own personal view on the debate and then judge the debate. So make sure whatever you do, do not let the adjudicator take their own personal view into the debate and then give the results. So let's move on. What I want you to think of rebuttals are counter arguments. A lot of people think that rebuttals are again one line. They think that if you come in and say just one line, this is gonna be the rebuttal to the whole argument. Again, if your opposition or the team you're going up against, or the teams you're going up against, if you're in BP, are any good, they will have a lot of layers to an argument. It just won't be a singular assumption that they have given and that they will try to prove through just one assumption. Again, if the other team is still coming up and giving only assumptions, make sure you are still structuring your rebuttals so that even their assumptions, if they were to be layered and turned into actual arguments, they would be rebutted. So remember, rebuttals, I like to think of them as counter arguments, as rebuttals should also have a structure to them. And what's the structure? It's the same as the arguments. AREL. As mentioned before, let's also look at how this should be taken into account while doing the rebuttals. And like the arguments, AREL stands for assumption, reasoning, example, linking back. Now, you don't want to come in and rebut all the arguments that they have given and every single layer that they have given. If the debate is good, there will be multiple layers and multiple assumptions that you'll have to break. Remember, every single argument has a core idea attached to it. Now, the core idea is up to you to find what it is. And if you find the core idea, break the core idea through your rebuttal. Now, the core idea should be well polished due to the fact that there have been multiple layers and assumption to it. Now, can you just come up and say one line and then expect the whole argument to be broken? Of course you can't. You have to come in, and even in a rebuttal, you need to give the assumption to what core idea are we talking about. The core idea that we are talking about can be expressed in a singular line or multiple lines. And if you think the multiple lines can be turned into multiple assumptions, do it. And it makes the structure better. And then after you've made the assumption to how we tackle the argument that has been presented, remember, you need to give the reason as to why you think the argumentation is flawed. Find the loopholes in it. Find what can be taken to counter the argument that has been talked about. Reasoning. Provide your reasoning as to why you think the assumption that has been presented to you is wrong. And then prove through your own assumption of the rebuttal, saying why you think this should not be taken into account. Again, a lot of people think that rebuttals can be just done by 1-2 lines. They just come in and say that we think the argumentation of the government or the opposition has been flawed due to the fact that this. And after that, they just say, so we think that this is the reason why it's flawed, and we think that is why we cannot take this into account. Again, this is just an assumption. You're not coming in and giving the reason as to why we think this should be taken into account. And that is where the structure of a rebuttal is very important. Your rebuttals should also be structured and should also be layered and taken into account. And then a lot of people think that these are rebuttals in the end and we shouldn't give examples to them. Again, since the arguments have examples to them, you can come up and give your own examples to your rebuttal. Because again, as we have told, rebuttals are counter arguments and should also follow the given structure. Give examples to your rebuttal so your rebuttal seems much better and much more fleshed out. If your rebuttals also have examples, the adjudicator will think, alright, this rebuttal is actually something that's practical in the world and something that should be taken into account. Now, just because you think the rebuttal is something that we should be doing very quickly to get into our own arguments, remember whips have the duty of rebutting most of the arguments that has been given. And since you're the whip, or even when you're the second speaker, third speaker, fourth speaker, remember, you don't have to rebut everything said in the debate, because most of the time it is just fodder to feed. But yes, if the debate is actually good and is a high level debate, there will be arguments and all of them will matter. But that is something you have to take into account and take the core idea of the arguments presented. Again, every single argument has a core idea, and that core idea is to be identified by you. And if an argument you see is not that important to the debate, but can be rebutted in 1 line or 2 lines, do it. But if you can prove them to be more structured, the structured version is always the way to go. Now, a lot of people don't do this because rebuttals take up a lot of time if you're structuring them anyways. But do remember, since you're thinking of rebuttals as counter arguments, even if you're taking this much time, you're also providing a sort of an argument to your own side, the argument that goes against their argument. So the rebuttals are arguments that you're standing saying that, alright, even if they say this, we are not taking into account for this reason, and this creates a sort of let's imagine a barrier that does not let them break the pillars. As mentioned before, the analogy that I love to think about are arguments as pillars of a building. Now, if the pillar is damaged, that means the building won't be as sturdy as you think it will be. And both the sides will try to break the pillars of the other side. And when you're trying to break the pillar, as your side, it is your duty to protect the pillars. And if you cannot protect the pillars, that is when your building won't be as sturdy as the other ones. So remember, your rebuttals are like barriers to them building your pillars. And then linking back, as mentioned before, linking back is very important. And if you do not come up and say why your rebuttals are so important to this debate, again, it goes on the adjudicator to think if it is important to the debate. Do not let the adjudicator think for themselves. Let the adjudicator judge the debate on what you have said. Important. Take the central core issue of an argument. As mentioned before, are all arguments have one or two central issues to them or core ideas to them. Now, to identify that core idea, see what has been talked about in this argument. Now, arguments have multiple layers to them, as mentioned before. Now, from those layers, see which ones are the most important and make the best foundation to the pillar that they're trying to set up. And when you find the basic foundation on which the argument is building on, make sure that is the central issue and you're tackling that. And that is why you should take the core idea and rebut those core ideas, not the whole argument. Do not waste time on taking every single layer that has been mentioned and then rebutting every single layer one by one with your own rebuttals. This takes up a lot of time and you have no time to prove your own arguments in the end. And after that, when you're not left with any time, you're left with this burden on a whip or even your deputy trying to come in and fix whatever mess you made of the debate. So make sure your rebuttals are not about everything. Make sure they attack the central issue that is underlying in the whole debate. Now, this is important. Compare the debate. Now, your rebuttals are something that you're giving as a counter to their argument. So, is your rebuttal better or is their argument better? Compare that. Compare in which the world is better. Compare and show why your rebuttals are much more important than the arguments that they are taking into account. Again, the reasoning that I am mentioning, remember to compare why the reasons you give to your rebuttals are much more important and should matter more than the arguments and the layers that they are giving. Again, the reasonings you give and the rebuttals you give are going to be rebutted by your opposition again. So make sure your rebuttals are still standing even after, let's say, 1 or 2, even 3 in BP. People come in and show why your arguments are, why your rebuttals are irrelevant. Now, make sure your rebuttals are still relevant when the others come in and try to break it. That is why comparison is so important to the debate. Compare both the argument and the rebuttal and show why your one always wins and why your one is much more important. Always remember to link back. Now, as mentioned, compare. When you're comparing, you're showing why your rebuttal is more important than the arguments that they are showing. This is one type of way you can show your arguments or your rebuttals are important to this debate. That is also one method of linking it back to the motion. There are multiple more methods, so remember to link back to the motion, saying why your one is more important, why this should matter in the debate, and why you should be winning the case with your rebuttal rather than the arguments. Again, remember, you're trying to win here. You're not trying to come here as a friendly banter. This is a sport and you're always trying to win. So make sure your one wins always. Now, remember, a single rebuttal can have multiple layers and assumptions to it, just like arguments. This is what I was talking about. Make sure your rebuttals are well fleshed out and make sure your rebuttals have layers and assumptions linked to it that make it seem much more better to take into account than whatever the government or the opposition is proving to you. Now, giving multiple layers to an argument, to a rebuttal, you can make the rebuttal seem much more important. And you can also do one thing. You can take multiple core issues that have been presented by the opposition side or the government side and then rebut them through a single rebuttal with multiple layers, showing why both of those cores are being broken through this one argument or one rebuttal, sorry. So remember, this rebuttal make sure to layer them and make sure to structure them so the adjudicator finds it much more palatable and take it into account. Now, what have we learned so far? We have learned the proper rebuttals, how to rebut, and why rebuttals are so important. And then we have learned that the structure of a rebuttal are also important, and the structure matters a lot when you're giving your own rebuttals, and it makes it much more palatable to the adjudicator. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure to share it, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comment box below.